Welcome, everyone, to the We Are For Good podcast. You know, we usually start a lot of these podcasts out, John, with just this very upbeat feeling. We're so jazzed to talk to our guests, which we are undeniably jazzed today. But I think there's kind of a different tone coming into it today because this topic that we're going to discuss today on the podcast is so deeply personal to us as Oklahomans. And so we're coming at it with a little bit more reverence today because we're interviewing just an incredible human being, Kari Watkins, who is the executive director of the Oklahoma City National Memorial. And for anyone that was born after 1995, we were just talking about, Julie is our producer, and she was born in 1996, and she was not alive during the time of the Oklahoma City bombing. And, as a young professional, we're just so honored to be able to bring the story to people that are either not Oklahomans or people that have not heard the story at the frontline level. And at the time, we all know that the bombing was such a moment in our country's history. It was the largest act of terrorism, and it was right here in our community.
It's like where you expected it the least, where life was just simple and calm and the last place you would expect for it to happen.
Oh, such a calm and idyllic day in Oklahoma City. And we're going to talk to Kari, who not only is she the executive director of the memorial and of the marathon, but she was the first boots on the ground, first employee for the Oklahoma City National Memorial, and she has been with this organization from inception until today. So she has just an incredible, unique lens into the growth of what has become just almost the most tragic point for Oklahoma City into what is such a point of pride for us today. So Kari, welcome to the show. We are so honored that you are here today. And I want to give our listeners just a little bit of background on Kari. She's a third generation journalist. Whoop, whoop.
Good
so
journalism.
Right it. And she was the first staff member. She came on as the communications director in March of 1996, which was 11 months after the bombing, April 19th, 1995. And then 3 years later, she was named the executive director. And so she oversees not only the operations, but the marathon, which is, I feel like I've read this somewhere. Kari's going to correct me, but it is one of the top 10 most beloved marathons in the world. I think it was ranked at one point like the most meaningful marathon. I've run a couple marathons across the country, and by far, I am telling you runners out there, if you have not run in the Oklahoma City Memorial Marathon, you are missing an experience unlike anything you will ever experience on a run. So Kari has done a ton of fundraising. She was helping to raise $29 million for construction of the outdoor memorial, the museum, and another $10 million for the 903 campaign, which we'll let her talk about in a little bit. But I need to quit talking because we need to hear from Kari. Kari, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Can you give us just a little bit of background about kind of your professional journey and what led you into this incredible position that I think you are just unbelievably and uniquely qualified to fill and to represent us as Oklahomans in this role?
Well, thanks. I mean, I'm giving really all the credit to God. It really was a kind of a God moment that I was working on a business transaction with a local attorney, and his senior partner happened to be a guy named Bob Johnson, who had been named by the mayor and the governor to chair the memorial committee. And my attorney was a guy named Joey Ferretti, who now is the head legal counsel, I think, for PepsiCo, Frito-Lay. But Joey's like, well, what are you going to do? And I'm like, I'm going to just relax by the pool and finish my MBA. And he's like, well, that's not a good idea. You got to keep working. And he kind of made the connection between Bob and I, and he thought my background was kind of uniquely qualified to help. And so I agreed and met with Bob the next morning or the next day, and the mayor a couple of days later, and decided I would do this like 20 hours a week. And I think there was never a 20-hour week, maybe the first
famous
week,
last words.
It really was a process by the mayor and Mayor Norg and Governor Keating, who put this 350-member task force together. And they would choose family members, survivors, first responders, community leaders, rescue workers from around the country who would come here to help. And they had put this task force together, and really it was my job just to kind of be the staff person for it and do whatever was needed, and that literally meant whatever is needed. And I was finishing my last trimester of my MBA, and it worked perfectly for me. And so I kind of fell in love with the people. I fell in love with the mission. I didn't really know what I was getting into. I totally understood what the families wanted, and that really was something to remember their loved ones by. Those people went to work that day, and they didn't go to war. They were, for the most of them, were civilian employees of the government. I mean, went to work to do a job, just like we're doing right now. And McVeigh and his cohorts decided they were going to change that. And so you had this group of family members who, for the most part, were just hard, quiet workers doing whatever they did, wherever they did it. And some of them were used to being community leaders, but for the most part, they just were going about their business, doing hard work. And um, their world changed. They were media stars. The media wouldn't leave them alone. They were thrust in this spotlight they had not been used to, and it gave me an opportunity to really work with them and guide them and help them, and they taught me so much, still do. So I think for me, it was just at the right place at the right time. It was just meeting the right, being around the right people, and to watch Oklahoma City, I mean, totally transform itself after the bombing. We had voted on maps, the penny sales tax ahead of that. It was in somewhat trouble on the morning of April 19th. Things were being Budgets were overrun. People weren't crazy about the process, even though we'd all voted on it. And after the bombing, none of that mattered. We just figured out how we were going to come together as a community for the good and do something to make the very best out of the very worst situation. And we did. And there's really no one person. It really was a collection of many hearts and many minds that made Oklahoma City what it is today. And the memorial sits kind of at the heart of it. And I don't think that's by accident, but the memorial sits here kind of as a symbol of resilience and strength. And, strength lies within all of us, but so does hope and resilience and a lot of other great qualities that we have to find within ourselves to move forward.
That's such a beautiful explanation of what happened, because I think if there's a theme to this conversation today or to this story, it is out of the ashes, literally out of the ashes, Oklahoma City was able to rise from the worst thing ever and change it into a place of hope and not just hope. I mean, I think the brilliance of the museum is that they became an epicenter of education and outreach for teaching not just adults but children and school age children about terrorism at a level that they could understand and they could grab it. And for those who haven't been in Oklahoma City, which is probably the majority of our listeners, the museum and the memorial sit adjacent to each other. And when you picture a bustling downtown like Oklahoma City, I mean, there's just so much busyness and noise and color. And when you are in the space of the outdoor memorial, it is the quietest, most reverent place that I can think of actually in our city. So I really encourage everyone to come out. I just think when you have a moment like this in your lifetime, to me, it's like where were you when JFK was shot? Where were you when the Twin Towers came down? I'm very curious, Kari, about where you were and what you were doing, because I want to give our audience some perspective. I was a 15-year-old girl sitting in physical science class in Oklahoma City, in Northwest Oklahoma City. And I heard and felt the explosion go through. And I would say we were probably 20 miles away. And I remember my science teacher in that moment talking to us about what a sonic boom was. Oh, what you just heard and what you just experienced was this. And I just remember an hour later finding out what had happened. And as a 15-year-old who had never watched the news, didn't care, you're so self-involved as a child, I remember being completely rapt at watching every single piece of video, of testimonial that came through. We had a couple in our neighborhood that had gone down to the Social Security office to get cards that were both killed. I had a very good friend in my youth group who lost her father, that I run for every time I run that race. And I just think that is not a unique story. That is everyone in Oklahoma City has a story of how they see this happening through the lens of where they were. So I'm very curious, Kari, where you were and what kind of profound impact that had on you.
I was walking out the door, literally, of my condo, which is about 50th and Penn, to go to class. And literally, as I was opening the door, I felt the blast and couldn't believe it. Went back, turned the television on. Happened to be on Channel 9. So at the time, it was Regis and Kathy Lee. And Channel 9 happened to have that helicopter up heading to Stillwater. They spun it around and got those first hours of the first minutes of the helicopter shot, which really no one else has because they closed the airspace after that. And so that's what I saw. You see that in the museum as kind of your first vision, because that's what most people saw. If you're sitting at home, that's what you saw.
Yeah. So
one of our challenges is like to Julie, her generation. I mean, is we're now teaching this story to people who were not alive in 1995.
Right.
When we built the place, we said we would always teach this story to a generation that didn't know it because they didn't live it. And that seemed to happen really fast. That came around very quickly. When we built the museum the first time, iPhones weren't even discussed. We redid the museum 5 years ago with the $10 million enhancement, and iPhones are a real part of it, and communication and technology and apps, all that's a real part of your experience now if you want it to be. But one of our biggest goals today, now 25 years later, as we look back and think forward, is how we reach people where they are. So there's a new augmented reality app that's on our app. You can augmented reality experience that you can have as you go through, and you can have a family member, a survivor, a first responder, or community volunteer kind of walk you through the experience. There's a journalist perspective. There's a kid perspective on the app. There's all these different ways that you can learn the story. And so I think our goal now is 25 years later, looking back, is making sure that story continues to be alive and relevant. But as we look forward, is making sure that people consume that story on whatever level they're willing to consume it. And, pre-COVID, kids would be on their field trip on the way down here. They'd Google on their phone the story. And sometimes they would know the story. Sometimes they'd have no idea the story. Sometimes teachers had done pre-prep, which what we hope for, but not everyone has time to do that. And so we would get these kids that would maybe have a conspiracy theory or have a perspective, and we would spend so much time working through that now we're just meeting people where they are and trying to make sure they can consume the story at whatever level they're willing to learn it.
What a smart approach.
And I feel like, being an Oklahoman growing up is that you experience it at different phases. I have the memory of when I was an elementary school kid and trying to process that day, which feels different now today. Just thinking about, you feel the gravity as you get older of just how powerful in a negative way this was and what this did to families and to our community. And you see that as an adult and it just feels differently. So I love that y'all recognize that, and you're just approaching it in such a global way to say, we want to meet people where they're at any stage of life, because this is an ongoing process, just like everything. It's like we've got to learn our entire life, and be educated. So, Kari, you had mentioned the task force that came together. Did you say 350 people?
Yeah.
Like, that is a monstrous task force.
Holy
Let's
smokes.
be honest.
That is fraught with death by committee.
Right? But I just think,
everyone should get a chance to do that at one point in their life.
You haven't lived until you've had a task force of 350.
I just think, one of the themes that we see continually as we talk to more folks is how philanthropy is a conduit to healing, to hope. And we firmly believe that because we've just seen it play out. I just wonder if you could speak to, how do you shepherd some of the most broken people and families and people, civic leaders, and bring them to a place that you've created, this holy space. This is like one of the top museums in the country, one of the best marathons in the country. How do you get people that are so broken to that spot today?
Yeah, I think first the starters, and I just gave this pep talk to a consultant we were using yesterday. We established a level of excellence that we aren't willing to compromise on. So for those people who were sitting at their desk at 9:02 and lost their lives, they deserve the very best we have to give as a community. And that's not second fiddle. It's not third place. It's first place. Whatever we can do, we've got to do the very best. And so while we are a nonprofit, We try to do things at a level that are first class, and we try not to lower that bar. And that means from how we mow the grass to how we take care of bathrooms to our video production to our newsletters, whatever it is, we really believe they deserve the very best. So that said, I think we really wanted to make sure they could trust us, and that we knew we had their support going forward. So we have what we call a conscience committee, and so monthly for the last year, and they've been a part of us forever. But as we prepared for the 25th year, we've met monthly, and so it's family members, survivors, first responders, and they come in and meet with us monthly, or we've been doing it on Zoom since March, or April. But I think our goal is to make sure they know in everything we do, we keep the mission first and foremost. And these are people who were impacted the most. But saying that, there's also a board of governance, a board of trustees that about a third of them were impacted directly by the bombing, and then community citizens or volunteers. But most importantly to know is, when times of tragedy, people, you're right, people do whatever they can. They're impacted. Oklahoma City set a standard in 1995. Millions of dollars, thousands. I mean, people gave pennies and dimes and hundreds of dollars and sent it to Oklahoma City. And they established, the governor and the mayor established a scholarship fund at the time to the Oklahoma City Community Foundation. They've spun that off to a trust now, but I mean, dozens of kids. I mean, there have been doctors and lawyers, kids who lost parents have been able to be educated free because of philanthropy, because people gave in the worst moment, and they took those monies and wisely invested those, and now have disseminated those to kids. Some to, there's a surgeon amongst them, there are lawyers amongst them, there's veterinarian among them. There's some really great stories, and there's teachers and preachers. I mean, there's all kinds of people that's the beauty of the story. But those people lost the most that day, got to go to the school of their choice in Oklahoma and have the education of their choice because people were so generous. And I think that's important to realize that even 25 years later, some of those kids are still being educated because that money was taken and cared for and disseminated in a way that made those kids be able to have, even if they were 1 year old at the time, they're still being able to be educated because that money's been protected. And so that's an important story, I think, that came out of this, and just how people gave so much to the Red Cross. The Red Cross still has a fund that United Way was very impactful. That it impacted a lot of charities in 1995, much like COVID, I think, has for some people, where because of the bombing, people sent all their money, and then maybe they forgot that the ballet needs it, other people need it too. And so I think taking care of nonprofits in times of tragedies, it's not just the people who are impacted, it's all the other nonprofits who suffer because everyone's sending money to the tragedy. And so that's something I think we've tried to work on as a community and be better about, and teach. I think we've set a standard as a community that we've shared with other communities going through it, New York and DC and Orlando and Virginia Tech, other schools. I mean, other places that have been impacted. What did we learn from the lessons of philanthropy and how to disseminate that money in a fair way? We did it very differently than New York, and I think families have different opinions of how we should have done it. We did it the best we could at the time, and I think that's one of the things you have to learn in these tragedies is that you take it on in the moment of the highest intensity, and you take care of it, and you want to make sure you protect it, and so therefore you make a plan, and then maybe 5 or 10 years later someone else does something, doesn't make what you did right or wrong, it's just different. And so for us, none of that money came to the memorial. All the memorial money raised was through private donations. The federal government gave some, the state matched that, and we raised the rest privately. And we have a nice endowment, trying to get it to $25 million by the end of this year. And that may be a little tough because of the circumstances, but that was our goal going into this year. And for us, that's how we've survived COVID. I mean, we applied and got the PPP just like most other nonprofits, but we want to be good stewards of the money, but we don't get an annual appropriation to run the site. People think it's a National Park Service site. It is an affiliate of the Park Service. They are on our site, but we don't get government money from them annually to run. to run the operation. So what people pay to go through the museum is what operates and maintains the outdoor site in the museum. And then we raise about $1.5 million a year. About $1 million of that comes to the marathon normally, and about $500,000 we raise for programs and projects. And so it's a big job. We've got a great team here, great staff, great volunteers who work on that, and we just it's just like everyone else. You get it done, and you take a week off to think about it, and you start back up. It
There's
never ends.
there's so much that I just want to talk about, and
So
all
good.
that was just I mean, conscious committee, my mind just exploded. I mean, that is such an evolved level of thinking to keep the goal so simple and so upfront, and this commitment to excellence and not ever deviating, even in the bathroom, from having nothing but excellence is such a high bar to set. And I mean, I just have to compliment you, Kari, because I've been to the memorial and the museum several times, and it is just that. I mean, even the Thunder, every time they bring on a new player, I mean, they are required to go through the museum.
Yeah, and same with police and fire. Every new recruit comes through here. I think I mean, it goes. I mean, I know this is and down to the gnats, but I mean, like I went on maternity leave 16 years ago, and I came in for a meeting, and the elevator opened, and the lights were kind of pink, and I'm like, why are these lights pink? And they're like, well, we save a couple bucks a light bulb. I'm like, no. And so I think we've had to teach staff and continue to teach new staff that you don't want to walk over a dollar to pick up a dime, but you also don't want to waste money. And so I think that's a fine line that we've tried to balance here. An incredible board of directors who sees that mission and helps us with that, and make sure that in everything we do, we honor what was lost here, and we make sure that those people are taken care of and their story is told. Because if it weren't for this place 25 years later, this story would not hold the same meaning, because people's memories are short and they move on. And because we bring people back to this place and back to the story, it has a level of stature that without this institution it may not have. And I don't say that arrogantly. I say that that's the importance of places of history. If you couldn't go to Gettysburg, would you remember it? Would you think about it? Because they're putting out some great programs. The Vietnam Wall. I mean, you think about places that have impacted you in your life. If you couldn't have gone there, would you have been impacted by the story the same? And the answer is probably not. I mean, unless there's a personal story that just touches you, you probably wouldn't have the same impact.
I think that is such a brilliant, if we had a aha moment in this interview, that was it right there. Because as nonprofit professionals, we have to constantly be asking ourselves, how can we elevate our game to make our missions more meaningful? How do we connect people to it? And I think, we can do as many impact reports, we can send as many pretty pictures and videos, but when you touch something, when you see it up front, it changes the landscape. And let me just tell you, the first time I went through the museum, and you will see this, listeners, if you go through, the first thing you do is sort of walk into this dark room, and there is nothing, you can't see a thing. And all you hear is it was a cassette tape of a meeting that started at 9:00 in the Water Resource Building across from the Alfred P. Murrah Building. And as you're listening to this very, I hate to say boring, but very corporate meeting going on, knowing that at 9:02, and then all of a sudden, I mean, just the tension that's building. And the second you hear that explosion on this very rudimentary cassette tape, the lights come on. I mean, I don't even want to steal the experience for everyone, but immediately it becomes an experience for you. And I think that is where the rubber meets the road in philanthropy. This is where people begin to not only just give, but become emotionally invested, give of their time, when they can see and touch something that matters so much in their life. And I want to stay on the storytelling piece, because I can't imagine how many stories that you have, Kari. I mean, stories of heartbreak, stories of hope. And my question is, how do you take the most painful story and tell it in such a real and humanizing way that honors these victims, yet still imparts these lessons to even the littlest ears about what happened here and what we can learn from that? Maybe talk through the challenges and rewards in that.
Yeah, I mean, we put the museum together with some of the best museum folks in the country. A guy named Patrick Gallagher, Michael Carr, Herman Carr. Those folks have told stories in some of the best museums in the country. If you made a list of your favorite museums, they probably have had fingerprints on it. 5 years ago, we brought another company in, Cortina Productions, who does interactives and media. So really, those three partners have been critical to us. And then we have a exhibit fabrication company out of Ohio that has been with us all 25 years. And so um, I think back to those people, how they've come here. And I would say they came here with maybe a little arrogance because they've done some of the best museums, but they were humbled by the stories and they were humbled by the people. And they hold this place up in high regard for how we did it and the process in which we did. Because there's not a word in the museum or story that's told that has not gone through the conscience committee. I mean, it just hasn't. When we decided to add McVeigh's car as a piece of evidence, our designer brought that to the conscience committee and asked them, here's why we think it's important, and they understood. And it's not really that the museum is not really for them. I mean, they certainly it is for them. I don't want to. I'm careful how I say that, but the museum is to tell their story to so many others. They know the story. They've lived it. McVeigh's car, they could take it or leave it. But to someone walking through to see this large yellow Mercury marquee, it may be a turning point to understand of maybe they love cars. Maybe it's some you don't know what artifact or story is going to touch someone. So when you go to the museum, you could read the museum panels, which are stories. You could watch the videos. You could touch an artifact or see an artifact and read about it. And now you can do these interactives. And so in the day of COVID, we've added stylus that you get as you walk through the museum now. So we don't want to lose that just because a lot of people have taken those out of their museum. They've turned them off. We don't want to turn those
brilliant.
off. Those are critical to us. So we've added stylus. When you pay to come to the museum, you get a stylus so that you don't miss a beat of the museum. And yes, it added cost, but it also added a dimension in their story that we didn't want to take away. We weren't going to take away. And so um, I just think through that, and I think through about how important it is to make sure we meet people wherever they are. So if my kids come through, they might touch the screens, I might watch the videos, my mom might read the museum panels or look at the artifacts. So if you come through as a family, everybody has a way of capturing the story. In the end, they're going to have the same story, just maybe different objects that told stories. So I think that's really been important to us, and to make sure that the storytelling reaches people in a way of not sensationalizing. That's nothing I believe in, but to be very real. And one of my favorite stories is a mom that is a lady I love anyway, but she lost her husband. He was killed in the bombing, and she had two teenage sons. And she talks about in one of these stories in the museum is that she had to teach her boys they were still a family even though their dad was gone. Well, you don't have to lose your dad through an act of terrorism to relate to that. There are a lot of kids who walk through here that their dads have walked out, or they were killed, or they died of cancer, whatever the story is. But they hear a mom who's in a time of grief saying, I had to teach my boys we were still a family even though their dad was gone. All of a sudden, they can relate to that on whatever level. Or you hear a mom say, my young daughter, my young adult daughter was in that building, and we had to rebuild our family, and we had to put our lives back together. And people can relate to those stories at whatever level they come in here with. And so I think, again, strength lies within each of us, and we have to find the resolve to move forward. But some of these stories are heartbreaking, and some of these people, it's taken them 20 years to get past it, or maybe some are just now starting to deal with it. Some people dealt with it early on, and they've moved to a different direction, but that doesn't mean they forget. And I think that's one of the important stories also to teach and to tell, is that when you go through grief, if it's the four of us, we're all going to handle it differently. And that's okay. There's no right or wrong way. And so I'm going to go through it one way, and you're going to go through it. All of us are going to tackle it differently. And hopefully in the end, we will do it in a way that honors and remembers, but we just get there different ways. And so that's something we always keep in mind as we go through this, is that we just have to give grace and respect people wherever they are and wherever they're coming from. And that comes every person who comes in the front door, to a family member, a survivor, first responder, a new recruit that's here from the police department, whatever the case. I know that it's an important place to teach the story of what we've been through as a community and how we can move forward as a country.
I mean, what you're saying is is not only beautiful, but it's true. As sitting in Oklahoma City and being a participant on some level, but just seeing the beacon that y'all have created, it is true that you have empowered us all to find a piece of that story to take forward. And I think of the marathon specifically. So I could tell you a horrible marathon story one day. It was the time I ran the Oklahoma City Marathon. It was really tough weather that year. It's usually very beautiful.
It was the humidity year.
It was the humidity.
Like 90% humidity year. Always challenging. But
if you're new to the marathon, they call it the Run to Remember, and definitely, despite the weather, I still remember standing in a sea of 20,000 people at the starting line, and there is experientially nothing that I've experienced like that in terms of connection to a cause or to an event like this. And you do feel like you are carrying the torch on behalf of these lives that were so horribly taken away. And I'm just curious to hear the story behind the marathon and how that came to be. How did y'all decide this is where we're going to put our stake in the ground? Because you've created something so vibrant for the city and for people to personally have an empowering experience through that. That's really just special. So I'd love to hear the behind the scenes of how that came to be.
It's a terrific story about the people of Oklahoma City. Okay. I'm not a runner, clearly, but a guy named Chet Collier, a local businessman, and two brothers, Thomas Hill and his brother David Hill, are runners, and they ran together. They'd go to Cincinnati or go to New York, wherever, and run a marathon. And they're like, why didn't Oklahoma City have a marathon? And so they came to us and said, we want to create this marathon. And Bob Johnson, our board chairman at the time, had chaired the Red Bud, and he knew how much work it was, and he also knew the margins were thin. And so he's like, well, I don't know, we'll think about it. And literally, we were about 3 weeks out opening the outdoor memorial. So it was April of 2000. And these guys were determined to do it. And they're like, nope, we've had these underwriters. Well, this will all be profit. We'll make this. It'll be donation to the memorial. It can become your annual fundraiser. And they put together a package that, I still have it because it was so, to me, powerful. And it was an outsider's perspective looking in. And to me, we needed that at the time. Again, another God wink. We really needed it we were so entrenched in telling the story. We needed someone from the outside to say, this is what could bring a community together. It was totally their creation. We've certainly worked on it from day one with them. And then about 6 years ago or 7 years ago, now we brought it in as a division. We've kind of worn them out as volunteers, and they've used company resources to the point they were exhausted. And they still are advisors. I still chat with all of them about it, and they're still around, and they still answer my calls, which I take as a good sign. And but it's a division of us now, and I have one full-time staff person who works on it, and then all of us in the office. That's kind of our part-time job to work on it as well. And as you know, we've just turned it to a virtual race. We were one of the last to switch to a virtual race because we kept thinking we could get there, and it just became obvious we couldn't get there because of the recent surge in COVID and hospital pressure, and it would require so many changes to get it there. We didn't feel like it would be the race that everybody loved, and or would they would even, we did a survey, would they run if we did it? It was about half and half. And so we've gone virtual for 1 year, we hope. And last night was the deadline to make your decision. And really the majority of people stayed on as virtual. And there were a couple thousand, I think, that switched to deferring it to next year. But we're going to make it the best virtual race there ever has been, I can promise you. And it will also allow soldiers across the world to run who've never been able to run, and people around the country who wanted to try to get here.
I love that.
I hate it for the hotels and restaurants, and I hate it for us. I love the camaraderie. It's one of the best days we ever get to work. But it is the reality of the world in which we're in today, and we are not alone. Both in the marathon world, the business world. The one thing about COVID is it has impacted every single person one way, for the good or bad. And so we've got to make the best of it, and we're working on that, and worked on a little bit earlier already this morning about how we do some videos and things that make it very special for the time in which we are, such as this time. And we're working to make sure that it's a meaningful race. The runners love this race because it makes them feel good. I think it is something that good that came out of the very worst. And it's a coming together of the community. And so we're going to try to step with the banners on the course and do some things. The best part about it is the weather. If you don't like the weather on the day you're going to run, you've got a couple of weeks to run it. And so hopefully one of those days in that span of time, it's going to be good. And we're going to do some fun. We're going to have some fun with that and our local weather folks, and just kind of make fun of what we've been through before, and kind of have fun with it. But I think the best part of it is that you get to run to remember. You get to do something that's giving back. It's bigger than ourselves. And you know, I have a son who's playing football in college, and the season got changed, and the coach was on the phone with the parents, and you could tell parents were disappointed by the chat and the Zoom. And he said, you know, folks, one thing we got to teach our kids that some of you have forgotten to teach them is this world is bigger than our one kid. And that's a lesson this world needs really bad, is this is all bigger than us, and we got to figure out how to work together to get there. And that really resonated with me, because I thought, you know, that's so true. Even in what we do here, is that this is all bigger than us. It's an important marathon, and we love it, and we need the resources from it. But we're going to figure out how to get through it, and it's bigger than us. And what's more important now is those people who are battling COVID, the people who've lost loved ones because of COVID. We want to, as a community, take care of those people and not be a super spreader event. Even if things were better by October 4th, we didn't want to bring people back and have a chance of making our numbers go bad again. And so I think the mayor and the governor, everyone understood that when we laid that out. But it'll be different for us, but we're going to get that done and then work toward hopefully having an in-person race in April.
Woo-woo. Love it.
Well, and there's no one that knows how to love the brokenhearted better, I think, than your organization. I mean, that is, to me, the gold standard. And you talk about wanting to create a meaningful race. You know, I've run in it several times, and I think the most meaningful part of the race for me is, again, if you've ever been, you know, down in a marathon, like a queue, with 25,000 people at 6 a.m. I mean, it is the most raucous. People are jogging everywhere. I mean, there's music, and I mean, it is an electrified feeling. And right before we begin, Kari will take the stage, and we will have 168 seconds of silence to honor each of the 168 lives lost. And I just got goosebumps right now. I knew I was going to cry in this one. And when you take 25,000 people that go completely silent, and I'm telling you, you don't hear a phone ring, which is a testament in 2020, because everybody's running with them. That sets the tone for everything that's about to come. And let me just tell you, you hit mile 21, you hate your life. You do.
Actually, before then.
Yeah, okay, maybe mile 16. I don't know. But it's like, as I'm sitting there, gutting through this race, I am running underneath these banners, and I am seeing, on the road, the names of these 168 victims. And I just keep telling myself, I am suffering right now, but there is no level of suffering that could ever reach this person's family, this person's, world. And we have to keep soldiering through. And it's such a fantastic lesson that I just loved coming to realize that, just as a human being and as a participant. You don't have to be an Oklahoman to feel that. You could be a volunteer on the road watching. So I just want to give you kudos for, again, making that experiential component come back full circle. You know, I have this really funny story.
That's a big part of it.
Yeah.
Making sure, again, that people who weren't alive understand what this race is about. And
Absolutely.
we have a kids race that's 5,000 kids. And one of our challenges is making sure they understand why they run. And so we've kind of devoted a part-time person to going out and doing these rallies and exercises with kids, but making sure also it has an educational component that takes the kids through, not the horror of it, but just understanding why we do this and that it's bigger than us.
That's so great.
I love the kids race. My kids have done that.
It's been an incredible gift that those guys gave us. And we certainly always want to honor them and honor what they did for our community in designing and developing the Memorial Marathon.
So I have this really funny story about Kari that she doesn't know, because when I was in my first job, which was Science Museum, Oklahoma, I'm a 22 starry-eyed young professional, and Kari had come to speak. I think it was at PRSA or something like that, And as I'm walking in to this discussion, the young girl who is also a young professional sitting next to me turns to me and says, "Do you know Kari Watkins?" And I was like, I recognize her only because I have been watching Kari kind of take on this life, you know. And at that point, it was 15 years later. And she says to me, "Did you know Kari has Bill Clinton's cell phone?" And that was my first foray into knowing.
In other words, she's a big deal.
She's a big deal. So I actually have stood back since that moment, and just, it's so fun to watch you and Bill Clinton's relationship evolve over the last 25 years. Talk about our former president, because he was really leaned in that administration into helping Oklahoma, lifting us up. They were deeply supportive, and I'm just very curious about that relationship.
Well, I mean, I just have to say, I think one thing about the memorials, we try to be apolitical, and we're not red or blue or Republican or Democrat. We just want to be Americans and want to be good people, good citizens. And I think Bill Clinton, if you go back 25 years in his presidency, some people believe this happened because of the Waco and how his administration handled Waco or Ruby Ridge, and likely that was the case. But he could have done what he needed to do and walk away from this story. He did not win Oklahoma. He had no political reason to come here to help, and he was here, within a couple of days. Governor Keating would tell you he talked to him 2 or 3 times a day, every day. President Clinton has been a friend to Oklahoma City, and we have a lot of what we have today because of money that came in that allowed us to rebuild parts of our city with government grants because of the bombing. I mean, Automobile Alley, sidewalks to Bricktown. There's a lot of money that came in that President Clinton made sure that agencies brought back to Oklahoma to help us rebuild our city. People don't really realize that, but it really did happen because of Bill Clinton and his administration. Governor Cuomo in New York, was head of HUD and made sure money came here. I think back about all those people who have helped us, who had really no reason. They didn't have to help us. They just did it because it was the right thing to do. They should have, and they did. But President Clinton's been a good friend to this institution and to us. To me personally, he's been great. I think this is, both a scar and a highlight on his administration. I think he made the very best of it. He took care of the families. When he's here, he still sees those families. He still checks on them. He would have been here in April had we had a chance to be together. And he did a little insert for the show. And then we'll have him back at some point, either, this April or sometime we'll have him back. But he's a great guy and big time thinker, helps us think through some things sometimes that we might get in a rut about. He just sees the most global picture of anyone probably I know. I think bringing up Bill Clinton is just a great kind of a sidebar to say, on this sacred ground, one of our most important goals is to find common ground. And you guys asked for a story, kind of an aha moment for me. When we were negotiating with the city about how much this memorial would look like, how many acreage we would have. We knew we'd have the footprint of the building that was going to come from the federal government. And we thought we were going to have where the museum was, which was where we are now, the old Journal Record building. There were parcels of land between us that we were going through eminent domain to get. There were 7 parcels of land, believe it or not, from where the Water Resources building stood to where the Survivor Tree. It was owned by 7 different folks, including the Journal Record spot. And we were sitting in the city council debating on whether or not we could close 5th Street. And we thought we had presented what was the most important, powerful, impactful reason why we should close that street and be able to have this whole 3.5 acre site. And as Bob Johnson sat down, this young man who lived in Regency Towers, which they were displaced for 8 months because of the bombing, he stands up and equally delivers a powerful speech. Young kid, not a lawyer, not a community leader, just knocked it out of the park. Unbelievable. And I remember sitting there at the time, City Hall were these church pews with this gold shag carpet. And I remember kind of holding onto that church pew thinking, oh my gosh, he just gave every reason why we shouldn't close the street. And now the city council, which we thought we'd talk to and work through, they've got a real decision on their hands. So they took some time to think about it. We walked back to Bob's office over at Crow and Dunleavy, and he was worked up, and I was worked up, and I said, to that kid, his opinion to him is as important as ours is to us. It's just that we have different opinions. And I have to say, I mean, at the ripe old age of 28 or 29, however old I was, that was probably the first time I totally understood common ground, that we had to figure out how to come to a common ground. And even though we may not get everything we wanted, we had to figure out how to come there. And I think that's been one of our purposes of this place. And it's something certainly we've got to continue to teach because our country needs it so bad is that we can all be from different perspectives. We all have different opinions. But just to find the common ground of the best of people, whatever that is. I mean, just to find find the good in people and to come to that ground and to whatever you have in common to work start there and work from there. But don't just go backwards because we don't agree. And don't just write people off because we don't agree. And that's a lesson we've worked hard to teach our kids. I don't know if we've done it or not, but we're still working on it. So certainly a note that I put in my son's letter as I left him for college this week is just always work to find the common ground. Go meet someone in the middle of the street. Don't wait for them to come to your side of the sidewalk. And I think that's where I think this place we have to figure out how to always meet people in the middle. And if that's an issue we're working through here internally, if it's a story we're trying to tell, if it's a national issue we're trying to weigh in on, is how we can bring people to the middle of the street and to negotiate in the middle of the street and not my side or your side, but just working together. And that's, I think, really where we need to be as a country is working to find a common ground.
I love that.
I feel like she just described the entire ethos of our country or
Company.
our company right now. I
Hopefully
mean,
our country
that
soon.
is how you reach for the greater good in this world. And it's like the divisiveness clearly does not work. And even as
Right.
people working in missions, it's like we know that community is the thing that builds something better than what we're standing in today. And so
Right.
thank you so much for sharing that. I thought that was a really powerful story.
But I say all that because it really does come from what Bill Clinton taught us was just coming together. I mean, it doesn't matter. He didn't have to come here and help, and he really did. But I think we've just worked for 25 years to find a common ground. It doesn't really matter who's president or who's in the Senate or the House, as long as they're willing to come together and work, we'll sit down and work with them.
Everything I learned in life, I learned in kindergarten. Share, be kind,
And on
and
this
play
call
well
with
in the
Kari
sandbox.
Watkins.
That's it.
Kari, you may feel free to say this is my answer to that because I feel like I'm going to be processing that and thinking about where to apply common ground every day in my life. But we ask all of our guests, what's one good thing? So, we have an audience that is diverse in, where we're at and the nonprofits that we serve and philanthropists and all in between. We love to just share something practical. You as a leader that has clearly created something incredible and remarkable and brought people together. What is something that we could implement today? That's great. One good thing.
Oh gosh, I would just say, being willing to listen and offer grace. I mean, I think it doesn't work if I'm only going to be willing to hear my side. And I think um, collaboration is key for us. I probably collaborate too much sometimes, but I feel like the more opinions I have, the better decision I can make. And and just to listen to what people have to say around the table. And even when you want to, catapult off your chair because it's either not the idea you like or you think it's crazy, just to process it and just take time to process it because there may be some nugget in there that's good that you can wrap with something else and make it. And then I think just the other thing I think we've got to do better is just offering people grace. I don't know where you're coming from today. You may be dealing with the biggest battle that you don't tell me about. But and so therefore it may impact you. So I think we really just in my mind it is really about listening and collaborating, but being willing to offer grace even when you don't want to or you're mad about it. Be willing to walk away and say, you know what, I don't know where she is today, but I'm going to give her some space and come back around tomorrow and try to work through it. Because people are, especially in this day today, this day and age we're in today, parents are trying to work from home, teach from home. They're trying to balance it all. And there are more demands on people than there ever have been. Truly, there really are, because of technology and you can't get away from it. And, you're going to school 2 hours a day or 2 days a week or not at all. And then some people can just sail through life, and then they don't understand why you're overburdened or gripey or trying to balance it. And I think there really just has to be a point of grace. And I say this to my team all the time: is you have no idea where they're coming from. He's working in the morning, his wife's working in the afternoon. They're trying to meet in the middle, and just let them work it out. These are not common, normal times, and neither was the days after the bombing. And we figured it out. And so it shouldn't take a tragedy or a crisis for us to be kind. And I think if you can just step up and be kind, that really is absolutely what we need people to do. And you got to remind yourself of that sometimes when you're in drive through. And the Oklahoma Standard is,
and they put pickles on your sandwich,
Yeah. The Oklahoma Standard is something that came out of the bombing, and it really is about showing up to serve, rising up to honor, and stepping up to be kind. And if we can do those three things, just serve, honor people, and be kind, then I think we could work out a lot of our issues.
Oh, I love that you brought up.
It really is pretty simple.
I love that you brought up the Oklahoma Standard, because, I have a picture of that in my mind. People standing in line for 3 hours to give blood, Oklahomans. There was no record of looting, not one, after the bombing. And it's like, if a community can move toward that grace, toward that kindness, you can it can transform itself. And we're living proof of that, living in Oklahoma City now. So, Kari, I guess one of my last questions is, you are standing in the heaviness of a very big topic here with a lot of emotions. And I'm wondering what the one story is that you have where you felt your life and your job come together because you were able to witness something, whether it was with an interaction with the survivor family, or a survivor, or a first responder. What is the moment that sticks out to you as the wow moment?
Well, I think other than just realizing that everybody has a right to their opinion and they're all meaningful to them. That moment I had at City Hall was something I think forever impacted me. I was raised the daughter of a politician and newspaper publisher, and so we weren't really taught to think much outside of what my dad, and I don't say that disrespectfully, that's just how he was. And so for me to go back and say, well, her opinion might actually matter. And that wasn't something that I had been raised to really understand. So I think I have gone overboard in making sure that was an area that we raised our kids to understand. And I think as far as the families and the survivors I've met, is just understanding when people go through moments, and whatever that moment is, like I said, it doesn't have to be a terrorist attack. Maybe it's your parent had cancer or their divorce or whatever it is that we as friends have to be there and be supportive in the good and the bad. It's not all just good. It's not all an Instagram moment or a Snapchat moment. There are lots of moments where you've got to sit there and be with friends when it's hard. And I think for me to understand that, to know that there were people in that building that their families, even 25 years later, are still trying to figure it out, is just a moment of kindness and grace that we have to give them, because I didn't go through that. I didn't lose my husband or my dad or my daughter. And so wherever people are, you just have to figure out how to be kind and get them to where they are, and to just show them kindness. So I really do think it's about being kind and sharing grace. And I haven't always hit the mark. I don't want to be hypocritical, because I've certainly stepped on some toes and made people mad. But you really do realize you've got to do that in the hardest ways. So in the hardest times, you've got to figure out how to come together and work for the good.
Kari, thank you. You are just a gift to the community, and the museum is certainly a gift to the community too. We'd love to connect our listeners to the museum and all that's happening there. What's the best way to connect with you all?
Memorialmuseum.com is our website. And I would just say this place is built by a lot of volunteers, an incredible staff, and family survivors and first responders who are willing to share their stories. And without those people, this place would be nothing. So I a lot of times get the credit, but there's a lot more people making it happen.
Well, thank you so much for coming and visiting with us today, Kari. I feel like you feel like you know this story, even living in it, but I got such a unique perspective from it by having you on today, and I hope our listeners also felt like they learned a little bit more about not only your organization and how unique ways to go about connecting people to philanthropy and to missions, but just about the greater good and what we can all do to kind of just lean into humanity and kindness. And I don't know that there's maybe been a time where that challenge hasn't been as formidable as it is right now. So we're just grateful to you and appreciate your service so much.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Okay.
We'll see you.